everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits. Earlier this summer, I dyed some really bright yellow tonal yarn using the sandwich bag method with fiber reactive dyes and 100% cotton yarn. I want to retry this method of applying color to yarn on a wool-based yarn with acid dyes and see how I feel. I think that ultimately this technique is going to have a lot of similarities to what we do when I dye yarn in mason jars, but since it's a plastic bag, I'm going to be able to squish and manipulate the yarn in here a bit, and there's something really fun about that I am very excited about. Before we jump in, I do want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my lab partner today, Jennifer. Jennifer, thank you so much for being my lab partner, and I'm really excited to dye some sock yarn for you. Today we are going to dye 200 grams of Knit Picks Stroll Fingering Weight yarn. This yarn is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon, and I dye it all the time. I have added on some removable nylon zip ties to the yarn, and I pre-soaked it overnight in some plain tap water. Now, my tap water does run slightly acidic, and I have found that some dye pigments will start striking to yarn before I add any vinegar or citric acid to the containers. And so that is just something that I do want to keep in mind as we start setting up this project. If you would like to learn more about any of the tools or equipment that I'm using in this video, I will have affiliate links down in the video description, plus a link to the Dyepot Weekly Lab Partner listing if you would like to become a lab partner like Jennifer is today. Today we are going to dye this yarn using Dharma acid dyes in 3 colors: teal green, baby blue eyes, and sea spray. And I would say that of these 3 colors, the teal green is the one I have used the most. Sea spray breaks into beautiful blues and greens. It's an awesome, fun color. Baby blue eyes I'm not as familiar with, but in the powder form it should have more, both of these have more pigmentation than what we see here. But of the 3, the teal green is absolutely the most pigmented color. All of the tools and equipment I use to dye yarn are dedicated for dyeing yarn and aren't used for the preparation of food. And when I'm ready to deal with the dry dye powder, I will be wearing a respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. But first I figured let's put the yarn into our gallon-size Ziploc bag. I have removed most of the water from the pre-soak. And I think what I want to do is sort of lay this yarn in thirds and then fold that kind of in half. And that is the, I guess, ordered way I'm going to position them into the baggie. Now granted, I will be moving things around in here when we add our dyes, and when we add a little bit of liquid, we're going to be squishing and moving everything. So I'm not entirely sure how it'll turn out, but basically we're next going to add our dye, then we're going to add some liquid. I have to think about this. Alright, I repositioned things a little bit so we have a little more surface area that we can visibly see here in our baggie. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this bag all the way. So now I am going to add the dye powder. And the question that I have for myself is if I should try to mix things up in the bag a bit before we add some liquid or not. So while I ponder this, I'm going to go put my mask and gloves and everything on, but you should let me know down in the comments which way you would try to do it, and I'll have to try the other way in another video. Okay, let's start with the teal green because it's the most pigmented. Now, when I do mason jar dyeing, I will layer the dye and the yarn together. So this is already a little bit different because the dye is pretty much going just on one part. The reason why I'm dyeing 200 grams of yarn here is that I have no idea how similar or different these 2 skeins will be to one another, and I'm very curious about that. Okay, so that was the teal green. Now I'm taking like the tip of a spoon of sea spray. I'll do another one. So when I did this with fiber reactive dyes, I mixed the dye with soda ash in advance. And the reason why I'm not adding citric acid to this directly, I'll probably add vinegar I'll probably add some vinegar in with the warm water. Or actually, this is what I'll do. I'm going to have warm water in a minute. Put the warm water on to help move these dyes around. And then we'll come in with vinegar after that. Okay, so here is the tip of my spoon of Baby Blue Eyes. Putting this back here. And getting one more. This is a fair amount of dye, but we will see how pigmented we end up. All right, so now I have the spoons here in this cup. I am going to fill this with about a cup, so maybe around 250 milliliters of warm tap water, and I'm going to pour that on. The combined color we got is this gorgeous marine blue. And so now I'm going to pour this on. A little bit on each of these colors. Ooh, that blue is really pretty. You know, it's fun because you never quite know how similar or different colors may be to one another. And so we've got that gorgeous blue. And then also have those greens. And I do want to remove the air. That'll allow me to squish this more. So ooh, this is fun. If I had, in here, if I had acid already, we wouldn't be able to move these colors as far as we are right now. And I think that, like, as it is, you can see as I squish it, some blues come down, but there's probably, like, a fair amount of pigment that is ooh, no, I'm seeing some greens move down. That could be striking already. So, yeah, this is cool. And this is new and different for me. Part of me is recognizing that it's leaking a little bit. This is why I'm on a protected work surface. Part of me wants to add a little bit more water. I like what these colors are doing. Yeah, I'm going to add about another cup of water, approximately. Still no acid, because I want to give the colors a chance to move through. But this is a completely, quote, new to me way to try to dissolve dye and move it. With extra liquid in here, I do have a secondary container I'm going to put it in when I'm going to let things sit. And I'm really liking where it's going. I do think, and I don't think it's cheating, I think I want a little more color over there. So I'm going to open this, and I'm still wearing my mask. And I'm going to get another spoon and add more color. I'm going to go for more of this sea spray. And I think that this is a thing that is fun here versus with mason jar dyeing, because if I was using a mason jar, you can't really add pigment in the middle very easily at all. Because you can pour dye over the top, but once it's closed, I suppose you could shake it, but adding more dye on the top isn't necessarily going to move all the way through. So, and there's still probably going to be lighter patches in here. Ooh, that's looking like really green. Much greener than it did before. But something about adding powders and mixing it through is very, very fun to me. And I am really excited. And you know, we've definitely got plenty of color, but there's resist in how the yarn is in the bag. And I feel like the more I mix, the more potential even coverage we could end up with. But I really like this, and I think I'm going to want to do this more. There's something about it that is... Oh, and I can remove my mask now. So, hold on. There's something about this that is so liberating. And now I'm going to add some acid. I'm going to go ahead and add one. Try to add one onto this side as well. 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. So some amount of the color is sort of staying where we first put it, and other parts haven't absorbed yet. And my plan for this yarn is to let it sit potentially outside overnight, do sort of cool that, and then we will steam set it, and actually we could steam set it in the baggie tomorrow. But if you look at what is being squished through, there is still some color, but not nearly as much as there was before. And so the squishing now is to help distribute that acid through the yarn. And I do see some lighter patches. This is very like peacocky. I really like it. I think that this is so much fun. And I'm not even sure if the different green and blue hues are showing up well on camera or not. Let me see if I can adjust things. I mean, it's hard to say because of the reflection, but there's more teal and then deeper blue areas. I think it is really fun. And Jennifer, I hope you are excited because I plan to do this again. This is very, very satisfying. And so it goes to show that there are many different ways that you can combine your dye colors and yarn. And we don't know how much bleeding we might see because we could have some undissolved clumps of powder, but I'm optimistic and excited. We absolutely could do a technique like this in a plastic shoebox with having our 200 or even 300 grams of yarn just here in the pan and then squishing it with our hands afterwards. The main difference for me conceptually with having it inside this baggie is that I have a little bit less control and knowledge over what's happening because I'm not checking within the fibers. And that is exciting to me, just as doing a tie-dye t-shirt is exciting to me. So don't worry, I will be revisiting this with fiber reactive dyes as well in the future. But I am going to now set this aside for at least 24 hours, and then tomorrow we will steam set it. I'm gonna go ahead and set this outside. I don't think that that's absolutely necessary. I also think that you could go ahead and steam set this immediately, and I don't think things necessarily will spread that much in that time. But one big perk of doing this cool vat approach where you're giving things a longer time scale is that conceivably you can set up more projects and then steam set it later on. Now granted, if I was just going to steam set this, that isn't as much of a difference as if it was in full immersion and I was giving it that time. But I enjoy a cool vat approach because it means that if you have limited stove space and limited pots and you're doing multiple projects at once, this is something I can set aside and then come back to and revisit later on. And as long as I didn't puncture it, I can even reuse the Ziploc bag for another project. And in fact, that is my intent today. So anyway, I will be back tomorrow and we'll check on the yarn. It is the next morning, and even with some rainy weather, you can see how steamy our little bag got. And ooh, wow. Okay, so now we're gonna look at these colors for the first time and try not to get a tangle. Here we go. Okay, and I am going to squeeze out that extra liquid, and you can see, since there's no color coming out, that the water has run clear. And what we have here is an incredibly soft, beachy colorway. There's a bit of white, but we've got a great spread of color. I'm gonna go put this directly in my steamer basket. And we will look at the second one. I am very, very excited to compare the two together. Maybe a hint of color left, but that's a reason why I steam set. So we do have a few light patches in here as well, but we may have some more pigmentation overall. We'll compare the two completely when they're dry, but this is also now going to go to the steamer basket. And as for the baggie, I'm going to wash it and dry it so we can use it again. For techniques like this, I like letting the colors absorb to the yarn really slowly, but I do like to add a heat stage to really make sure things are properly set. So this isn't quite steamy yet, but I am going to heat this in the steamer basket for 30 minutes. It's been 30 minutes and everything in here is nice and steamy. So I am now going to remove the yarn and let it cool completely so we can go and wash it. Let's wash this yarn. I love how soft these transitions are. They feel very, very nicely blended because, well, we did move things around a lot. And I just added some diluted dish soap. That bottle's almost done. If we had some more or any acid in the yarn at first, things would have struck a bit faster, and so we wouldn't have been able to move the color through the yarn as much as we did. And so I think that it would be fun to do this sometime, starting with dye that had been mixed with citric acid. That would be a little more similar to when I did this on fiber reactive dyes. But I have done things sort of similar to that. I've done some speckling on the countertop with no acid and then dipped into acid water, or with acid and then dipped into water just to see how the colors spread. So I have done things like that in the past. But anyway, I am not seeing any color come out, which is great. I'm going to go ahead and finish rinsing out the soap, but then I'm going to put this through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry so we can take a closer look at how similar these two skeins are to one another. These skeins aren't quite identical, which honestly makes sense. We added the dye in randomly and squished things around. There are similarities, and I would call them the same colorway. We do have light patches, I think, on both that lean almost white. And, you know, I debated between laying it like this or trying to lay it this way to line up some of the light patches. And so this is definitely a situation where the yarn, because the placement of the colors are slightly different, if you were going to knit with both skeins in one project, you probably want to alternate skeins, because I think that when you transition from one to the next, there will be some differences there, and if you want things to feel a little more even and less asymmetric, then you want to blend them as you go the whole way. Now, I definitely wonder if I should redo this, but mix citric acid in with the dye powder before I add it onto the yarn, similar to what I did with the fiber reactive dye project. The one main thing we know that would happen there is that the colors would strike faster, and we'd end up with less of a soft colorway. So should I give that a shot? What do you think? Let me know down below. Now that the yarn is dry, you can appreciate more of the teal and green hues versus the blue hues. There are some real similarities, I think, between the teal green and the sea spray, but the baby blue eyes is distinct and is a pretty bright blue that I am excited to explore more going forward. Jennifer, thank you so much for being my lab partner for this episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope that you're gonna love the yarn that I dyed. If you at home want to learn more about how you can become a lab partner and get shoutouts plus yarn dyed in an episode of Dyepot Weekly, go and check out the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. It's also filled with hand-dyed yarn featured in many, many different videos, and so it's fun to go explore both for sneak peeks of what may be coming up, or so you can snag yarn from one of your favorite videos. This technique we use today has some real perks over mason jar dyeing. When we layer colors in the mason jar, you're really letting some diffusion, but also the act of pouring water on to distribute the dye through the yarn. And there's a lot more resist because things are jam-packed in the jar. And so there's a lot more of a surprise, a reveal, when you open things up in the end. With this bread bag, sandwich bag type technique, we also can get a surprise in the end, but you use your hands to help manipulate the movement of dye throughout the fiber, which is cool on its own. But the added perk is that you can open the bag and add more dye if you want. Now, you can always choose to add more dye or over dye another project. But when you have things in the mason jar, you can't really do that unless you remove part of the yarn. You can add more dye to the top, but not to the middle or bottom. And so that accessibility that we have here today was another layer and just something different and fun that I'm excited to explore again. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.